You are listening to Bruce Wayne, written by Tim Maxwell and inspired by the Unproduced TV pilot created by Tim McCanlies. Prologue. How did it come to this? How did we arrive here? The questions floated through my mind. Quiet but insistent, I dipped my pen into the waiting inkwell. My hand, steady though marked by the years, began its deliberate work, shaping each word onto the cream-hued pages of a well-worn leather journal. This was no diary, not yet a confession either. Rather, it was something between an attempt at understanding and an act of preservation. A record for the curious or the cursed. After all, if a man cannot unburden his soul at the end of his days, when else would he dare? The cavern around me was small and close, its shadows broken only by the flicker of a lantern. It was a space fashioned out of necessity, but I had done what I could to make it bearable amid the relics of forgotten lives. Stacks of boxes crowded every corner, some dutifully labelled, others anonymous, abandoned to time. Empty glass cases lined the walls, their hollow reflections whispering of what once was. To me, they looked like vacant eyes, watching, waiting for me to fill them with truths I had long buried. Perhaps the answers are here, I murmured to no one in particular. My voice, worn thin with age and disuse, cracked against the silence. Somewhere among all this. My employer, a man of many names and even more masks, had seen fit to gift me a purpose, though whether it was mercy or malice remained unclear. "Catalogue it all," he had said. His tone had been distant but unyielding, a balance he mastered well. The artifacts, the keepsakes, the early years. The pen paused above the page as though it too was uncertain where to begin, and yet the words came, hesitant at first, then steady, flowing like a current I could no longer resist. In retirement, when most men are content to fade away, I have been charged with curating the ruins of an era. Perhaps this is for historians. Perhaps for judgment yet to come. Regardless, I begin this record, a humble attempt to piece together how my employer and I, men of intellect and reason, stumbled into this dark corner of history. A tale both remarkable and, I suspect, deeply troubling. The nib scratched faintly as I paused to gather myself. My eyes drifted to a box beside my chair, its edges bowed and brittle with age. On a whim, perhaps summoned by the same restless curiosity that had once driven us both, I reached inside. My hand emerged with a book. Business for Beginners. Its spine was cracked, the cover worn soft with use, a forgotten relic of early ambition. I turned it over, brushing my thumb across the faded title. It was the sort of book young men clung to when they believed the world could be tamed with ink and ideas. But arrogance often demands a payment unseen, its cost only revealed when it is far too late to bargain. Beneath it, tucked carefully away, was a photograph. I lifted it gently, my breath catching as I stared down at the faded faces it held, smiling, carefree, full of a promise we could not have understood. It seemed as though I could almost hear their laughter, our laughter, though the cavern remained as solemn and still as ever. My thumb traced the edge of the photo. How long had it been since those smiles were real, since there was something to smile about? For a moment I let the weight of it settle over me, the ache familiar but no easier to bear. I placed the photograph down, its edges curling slightly, as though reluctant to be drawn into the light of the present. Leaning back in the creaking chair, I returned to the journal. And so it begins. A story, a reckoning, call it what you will. Like all stories worth telling, it will not be without its casualties. Whether it brings answers or only deeper questions, I cannot yet say, but I owe it to him, to us, to try. The photograph stared up at me, frozen in that fragile moment of youthful optimism. I let my gaze linger, unable to look away. It was as though the years had conspired to strip everything away, but this simple glimpse into the past had found the first crack in the dam I had spent decades building, and so I stared back. Chapter 1. Back to Gotham. The London police station was a cacophony of noise and discord, its atmosphere thick with the rank scent of unwashed bodies and old sweat. Constables in their pressed uniforms jostled alongside drunks, pickpockets and assorted riffraff who shouted over one another, competing for the attention of the overworked desk sergeant. And there I stood out of place, immaculate in my neatly pressed butler's attire, a stark contrast to the chaos around me. The desk sergeant, a portly man with jowls that quivered when he spoke, looked me over with skepticism. "Bruce Wayne? The 18-year-old multi-millionaire?" He scoffed, incredulity dripping from every syllable. "Right, we've got him here, have we? In a cell with Prince Charles and the Beatles." I straightened my posture and fixed him with a look that I dare say could have made a lesser man wither. "He's only 17, sir." I replied curtly. "His 18th birthday is in 4 days." The desk sergeant's expression faltered under my steady gaze. "I understand there was a fight," I continued, my tone clipped with distaste, "in a bar, near the docks." The sergeant's mockery melted into unease. Quite right, too. I was quickly ushered through the labyrinthine jail hallways, the polished heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the concrete floors. A gaggle of anxious police officials practically fawned over me, stepping aside as though I were royalty. The police superintendent, a man whose carefully maintained moustache betrayed his nerves, strode beside me, wringing his hands. "Mr. Pennyworth," he began carefully, "do you often bail out your employer?" I kept my tone as dry as a well-aged Scotch. "Master Bruce has issues." "Bit of a handful, is he?" The superintendent pressed, his voice overly jovial, as if attempting to make light of the absurdity. I didn't dignify that with a full response. I only glanced at him and muttered darkly, "You have no idea." A nervous jailer met us at the barred door, his keys rattling with each tremor of his hands. "This way, sir," he said, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "He's in. The tank." My brow lifted a fraction of an inch. "The tank," I echoed, unimpressed. The superintendent coughed awkwardly. "It's for the, belligerent types, drunks, thugs. There's one bench, you see. They tend to fight for it." "They thought to teach your young man a lesson," the jailer added, his voice cracking under the weight of his own poor judgment. I regarded him coolly. "Oh, I wish you hadn't done that." The jailer fumbled, clearly confused. "It's only been a few minutes. I'm sure Mr. Wayne is all right." I sighed softly as we approached the heavy barred door, my gloved hands clasped behind my back. "It's not Mr. Wayne I'm worried about," I said. The cell was larger than I expected, its grimy walls lined with wary-looking men who now clung to the shadows, leaving the centre conspicuously empty. And there, sprawled across the floor, a dozen groaning thugs lay motionless, some cradling bruised ribs, others nursing swollen jaws. And on the sole bench, sitting with the casual ease of a king upon his throne, was Master Bruce. His dark clothes, expensive, well-tailored, were rumpled and marked with smudges, though not nearly as battered as the men at his feet. A faint scrape marred his jawline, but otherwise he seemed untouched, calm, composed, and more than a little pleased with himself. He lifted his gaze to meet mine, and in that familiar brooding face I saw it. The glint of trouble, and just beneath it, a challenge. "Master Bruce," I said evenly, stepping just inside the cell, "if you and your friends are quite finished." He pushed off the bench with that languid, cat-like grace of his, a rueful half-smile curling his lips. "So long, fellas. My ride's here," he called, glancing back at the men who'd thought to teach him a lesson. "See ya, Mr. Wayne," came a groggy chorus from the thugs. I moved aside as Bruce strode past me, his confidence unshaken despite the circumstances. Outside the cell, I fell into step beside him. "Master Bruce," I began, my tone clipped, though there was little point hiding the exasperation. "I'm sorry to spoil your entertainment this evening, but your trustees telephoned. You are instructed to return as soon as possible to Gotham City." Bruce froze mid-step. His shoulders tensed as though I had struck him. When he turned to look at me, his dark eyes flashed with anger, raw and unguarded. "No," he snapped sharply, the word cutting through the dim corridor like a knife. "No, I'd rather stay in here." I stood my ground, unflinching, and delivered the truth with quiet finality. "Sir, we have no choice." The fury flickered, softened, and then settled into reluctant acceptance. His jaw tightened, his expression dark as storm clouds gathering, but he gave the smallest of nods. Neither of us spoke as we moved toward the exit. I glanced at him sidelong, this boy who carried the weight of a man twice his age, who wore his anger like armor against a world that had already taken so much from him. For all his trouble and all his fights, he was still just 17. But Master Bruce was far from a child, and that, I feared, was only the beginning. The hum of the private jet was a constant, low vibration, a distant whisper of the world speeding by outside. Within the cabin, the air was still and heavy, broken only by Bruce Wayne's sudden cry. He shot upright in his seat, breath sharp and ragged, his body tensed as if preparing for a fight that never came. The echo of his nightmare lingered, a ghost that refused to dissipate. I turned my head calmly, unfazed. I had seen this too many times to be surprised. "Nightmares again, Master Bruce?" The boy, no, the young man, didn't answer. Beads of sweat traced faint lines down his temples, and his dark eyes flickered around the cabin like a caged animal assessing its prison. He swallowed hard and glanced at the book in my lap, narrowing his eyes in disbelief at the title, Troubled Teens. His look said everything his lips didn't. I smiled faintly and ignored him, turning back to the page with the same air of quiet determination I'd adopted since his childhood tantrums. "We'll be landing soon," I offered, as if to soothe him. My finger ran under a passage in the book, and I clicked my tongue with mock disapproval. "Oh, I see! Aha! How true!" I retrieved a bright yellow marker and highlighted the offending text with deliberate care. Bruce let out a huff of irritation, rolling his eyes like a petulant schoolboy. He snatched the remote control from the armrest and aimed it at the cabin television, eager for distraction. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, Bruce Wayne, larger than life, his photograph filling the background as a polished news anchor spoke. Returning to Gotham City for the first time in 12 years since his parents' tragic deaths. Bruce Wayne, the sole heir of the Wayne family fortune. Bruce scowled and clicked to the next channel. It made no difference. Every station had him pinned under their magnifying glass. "Of course, Bruce Wayne is traumatized," said a television psychologist, too cheery for the somber subject matter. "He was only 6 when his parents were murdered right in front of him. Bruce Wayne needs years of therapy. Years." The channel flipped again. Now a financial analyst gestured at plummeting stock charts. Prices down sharply due to concerns over the coming of age of heir Bruce Wayne, Wayne Corp's major shareholder. Another click. The screen jumped to an MTV host, all neon hair and tattoos. "This tattoo's Bruce Wayne, see? And this one's JFK Jr." Bruce clicked again, harder this time. The television settled on the face of a young woman, Vicky Vale, blonde, vibrant, and smiling with a practiced kind of warmth. The backdrop was an overly moody, shadowed photo of Bruce himself, his face a study in brooding. "What is it about Bruce Wayne?" Vicky said with that infuriating mix of sincerity and flirtation. "Gotham City's tragic prince, our very own Hamlet? Okay, so he's rich, he's handsome, and he's got these, amazing eyes." I turned my head toward Bruce and fixed him with an appraising stare. He didn't look at me, but the colour creeping to his cheeks betrayed him. "But what really gets to us, girls?" Vicky continued, her voice dropping to something sultry and intimate. "Yes, Bruce Wayne is troubled. He's lost. He's searching for something. And deep down inside, we girls hope what he's searching for is us." The television clicked off abruptly. Silence descended once more. I shifted slightly in my seat. "Master Bruce," I began, my tone carefully neutral, "you will find the media here far more offensive than in Europe." Bruce didn't look at me. "I know," he muttered. "Stay out of trouble, Bruce." It was a refrain we both knew well. "Sir," I said carefully, "you are a celebrity now entering upon the world stage. Intense curiosity surrounds you. Millions now scrutinize your every move. They should get a life. They envy you yours." He scoffed, his tone bitter as he looked out the window at the nothingness below. "Yeah? Well, they can have it." I studied him carefully. Even now, his brooding face was unmistakably young, though the anger that twisted his features spoke of years stolen from him. The pilot's voice crackled through the speaker overhead. "Sir, we're landing at Gotham City." Bruce turned his gaze to the window. Outside, the sprawling lights of Gotham came into view, their orange haze smudged like a bruise across the night. The darkness of the streets was barely pierced by the artificial glow, an unwelcoming skyline if ever I'd seen one. "Gotham City," Bruce muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Who in their right mind would want to live here?" I allowed myself a small smile. "5 generations of Waynes, sir. Not counting you, of course. Not me." Bruce's voice hardened. He turned back to me, eyes sharp, defiant. "Tomorrow, I'm signing those papers as fast as I can. Then we can get the hell out of here." "And where, might I ask, will we be hurrying off to next, sir?" His glare told me the conversation was not a welcome one, but I pressed on. "Sir, at your age, flailing about finding yourself is only natural, but you possess great wealth and a fine family name. You have responsibilities." "Bruce, get a respectable career," he mocked. "What is it you want, Alfred? Law? Business? Politics?" I shrugged, feigning thoughtfulness. "You could simply be rich, sir. Being a person of great wealth is not a terrible career, nor a strenuous one. There's no heavy lifting involved." Bruce's scowl deepened, and he turned back toward the window. The frustration radiated from him like heat. "I'm supposed to do something," he said suddenly, his voice quieter, though no less determined. "Who I am, what I can do, it's for a reason. But what?" I had no answer for that. "I wish I knew, sir," I admitted softly, "but soon you will have to decide." He didn't respond right away. He stared into the growing haze of Gotham, the city looming closer with every second. Finally, he spoke again. "I'll tell you what I do know. My destiny is not to run some stupid company." His voice had regained its edge, sharp and uncompromising. "Let my trustees keep running Wayne Corp, as long as they keep the checks coming in." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. I watched him carefully, the flickering lights of Gotham dancing across his face. Beneath the stubbornness, the sarcasm, and the carefully cultivated defiance, I saw something else. Purpose. It was unshaped, undefined, but it was there. I could only hope, for both our sakes, that he would find it before it consumed him. The photographers were already swarming by the time the jet's door hissed open. Like vultures circling fresh carrion, they crowded the entrance to the private terminal, cameras flashing in a frenzy, their shouted questions slicing through the air. I moved swiftly at Master Bruce's side, shielding him as best I could while we descended the steps. The crowd surged forward, microphones and lenses thrust toward us as we pressed through the chaos toward the waiting Rolls-Royce. A valet had already loaded the bags and handed me the keys with a curt nod, though the cacophony of the press drowned out all else. "Bruce Wayne, over here! Bruce, are you signing away Wayne Enterprises?" Any comment on Gotham's crime wave? But it was the voice of one reporter, a young woman with striking blonde hair and an unsettlingly bright smile that sliced through the noise like a blade. Bruce Wayne. Her voice was honeyed, almost gentle, but her words cut deep. "Your parents' killer was never caught. Do you have anything to say about that?" Master Bruce froze, just for a fraction of a second. The question hit hard, but he masked it with a scowl, so dark it could have eclipsed the shadows we were fleeing. Without a word, he ducked into the sanctuary of the Rolls' leather interior, shutting out the storm of voices and flashing lights. The reporter, clearly satisfied, wore a triumphant smirk. Cameras exploded with light, capturing the moment for Gotham's endless speculation. I slid into the driver's seat, and with a soft purr, the Rolls pulled away, the fading chaos still flaring in the rearview mirror. The gates of Wayne Manor loomed ahead, wrought iron silhouetted against the night sky like a sentinel of a bygone era. As the rolls glided through, the photographers pressed closer, a desperate tide pushing against the inevitable. The gates groaned shut, their finality punctuated by the startled yelp of an overeager journalist nearly caught in their iron embrace. The din of the press was left behind as the gates locked tight. Beyond them, atop its hill, Wayne Manor stood in brooding silence, a Gothic colossus rising against the darkened sky. We stepped out of the car. Bruce lingered, staring up at the manor as if seeing it for the first time. The windows were blackened voids. Ivy crept up the weathered stone walls like an uninvited guest staking its claim. 12 years, sir, I murmured quietly. Bruce nodded, though his expression was unreadable. His eyes traced the silhouette of his childhood home, and for the briefest of moments, the anger that burned within him dimmed, replaced by something far heavier, something unspoken. At the front door, I wrestled with the massive lock, its mechanism stiff from years of neglect. Vines clung to the frame, cobwebs fluttering faintly in the breeze. Bruce stood beside me, shifting impatiently. I remember, he said softly, almost to himself. Wayne Manor felt enormous, like it was built for giants, but I was only 6. The lock finally gave way with a groan, the heavy door creaking open into the vast darkness beyond. I allowed myself a small huff of satisfaction. They say when you return to your childhood home as an adult it seems smaller, I offered lightly, almost cozy. We stepped inside, our footsteps echoing against the cold marble floor. The cavernous entryway loomed around us, ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into shadow. Towers of windows cast pale slabs of moonlight across the dusty expanse. Statues lined the walls like forgotten guardians, their faces veiled in shadow. Massive fireplaces, faded tapestries, and tarnished suits of armour hinted at the grandeur the manor once knew, but now only dust and disrepair remained. Master Bruce inhaled sharply, a sound so faint he almost stifled it. "See?" I said, my voice quiet, though the acoustics magnified it to something far grander. Not so large now. Quite intimate, really. But Bruce didn't respond. He stepped deeper into the house, his footsteps ringing hollow as he disappeared into the gloom. There was no time to bring in a cleaning service, I called after him, though my voice felt small in the emptiness. "Would you prefer a hotel, Master Bruce?" No answer. He vanished down the hall. I sighed softly, shaking my head. "I'll fetch the bags then, shall I?" I muttered to no one in particular. Bruce wandered the house, moving from room to room with the air of a restless ghost. The grand halls, long abandoned, felt more mausoleum than home. Where there had once been life and laughter, there was now only stillness, a beautiful, haunting emptiness. I found him in his father's study. The room was as it had been all those years ago, lined with towering bookcases, the scent of old paper lingering in the air like a memory. Bruce stood motionless before a grand portrait hanging above the hearth. Thomas and Martha Wayne stared down from the canvas, his father stern and imposing, his mother warm and graceful. Between them, a boy sat smiling, a child untouched by the world's cruelty. Bruce's face betrayed nothing, but his eyes spoke volumes. They shimmered with the weight of grief that time cannot dull. I approached carefully, but the creak of the floor startled him. "Alfred," he snapped, his voice sharp. "Must you always sneak up on me?" "Old habits, sir," I replied, my tone light but familiar, not so easily broken. I joined him, our gazes falling upon the portrait. For a moment we stood in shared silence, the air thick with the weight of what was lost. "Your parents, sir, were the finest people I have ever known," I said, my voice low. Bruce's reply was barely a whisper. "I wish I'd known them." "So do I, sir," I said, my words heavy with honesty. Clearing my throat, I forced the moment to pass. "Dinner is served." At the vast dining table, Bruce sat alone at one end, his small figure swallowed by its sheer expanse. The silence hung heavy around him, his plate largely untouched as he pushed food idly around. From the kitchen came a sudden crash, followed by muffled curses. Bruce rose abruptly, striding toward the sauce. Peering into the kitchen, he found me in full chef's attire, glowering at the deflated remains of a soufflé. "The telephone rang as I was removing the soufflé," I said acidly into the receiver. "It's ruined." Bruce crossed his arms. "Who was on the phone?" "Your old schoolmate, Harvey Dent," I replied, dumping the culinary catastrophe into the bin. "He's hosting a party tomorrow night." Bruce's tone turned decisive. "We won't be here by then. Are the roll's keys still in it?" Yes, sir, I said distractedly, eyeing the bin with disdain. Don't bother putting it away, Bruce said, already turning. I'm going out. I beat him to the door, standing beside the rolls, freshly changed into my chauffeur's uniform. Holding the door open, I waited. Bruce paused mid-stride, eyebrows raised, his lips twitching with reluctant amusement. Nice uniform, he said dryly. Thank you, sir, I replied. And so fast. I allowed a small smile. Cambridge footlights. I was a tenor, played many roles. Bruce tilted his head. Weren't you a medic in the British Commandos? Indeed I was, sir. Shall we? He slid into the car without another word, the weight of his unspoken thoughts heavy in the night air. Chapter 2, Shadows of Decay. The Rolls-Royce prowled Gotham's streets like a shadowed predator, its polished chrome a stark contrast to the urban decay. Outside, the city unfolded its misery. Graffiti-scarred walls, flickering neon signs clinging to dingy storefronts, and gutters overflowing with garbage. Theatres offering nothing but vulgarity, alleys teeming with figures who lingered too long in the shadows. Gotham wasn't just sick, it was decaying from the inside out. Master Bruce sat beside me, silent and brooding, his eyes fixed on the streets as though memorizing every scar etched into the city. He said nothing, but I noticed the tension in his jaw, the faint twitch of his fingers on his knee. Seen enough, sir? I asked, keeping my tone light. It's worse the deeper we go. Bruce didn't look away. Keep going. We're close. That's when it hit me where we were headed. My grip tightened on the wheel. Oh, Master Bruce, not there. It's not wise, sir. The words slipped out unbidden, but they fell on deaf ears. He knew exactly where he wanted to go. Crime Alley. It wasn't a place so much as a scar. The rolls slid to a stop in Gotham's forgotten underbelly. The street lay nearly empty, but the air buzzed with danger, thick with the acrid stench of decay and despair. The street lamps were feeble, casting just enough light to make the darkness seem alive. Bruce stared out at the theatre's empty marquee. I said nothing but studied him, noting the stiff set of his shoulders and the shadowed weight in his expression. When he spoke, his voice was low and distant. The Mark of Zorro played that night, he said. My 6th birthday. It was only showing here and I had to see it. I couldn't understand why my father wouldn't bring me to this part of town. I threw a tantrum until he gave in. I turned to him, softening my tone. You were a child, sir. None of it was your fault. Bruce didn't respond right away. His gaze remained locked on the pavement, the spot where his parents had fallen. I just wanted to see Zorro, he murmured bitterly. A silly movie about a hero in a costume who fights crime. His grief hung heavy between us, palpable and raw. Sir, I ventured quietly, you mustn't punish yourself. Movement in the corner of my eye cut me short. My head snapped toward the far end of the street, where shadows stirred. Figures emerged, slow and deliberate, like predators scenting prey. My pulse quickened. Or me, for that matter, I muttered under my breath. Sir! Bruce didn't react. The figures closed in, 3 of them, hulking men with cruel smiles and unhurried strides. I swore softly. Master Bruce, I urged, sharper now, we should leave. Immediately. Too late. The thugs surrounded Bruce as he stepped out of the car, their leering faces caught in the dim, sickly light of the lone working street lamp. One, a brute with hands like slabs of meat, grinned darkly. Hey! Who do you think you are? He demanded, voice rough. Think you own this street? Bruce didn't flinch. Instead, his expression shifted, his lips curling into a cold, almost unsettling smile. No, Bruce replied, voice quiet and deliberate. But you do? I cleared my throat, unable to hold back. Begging your pardon, sir, but it seems you do own this street. Look around. Bruce blinked, startled. His gaze swept across the derelict buildings, each facade marked by faded signs. Condemned, coming soon, and beneath them in neglected print, a division of Wayne Corp. I allowed myself a grim smile. So, gentlemen, in point of fact, he does own this street. The thugs bristled, glaring. I sighed. Sorry, do carry on. Bruce shot me an incredulous look. Why in the world would Wayne Corp own this? But I was already a few yards away, feigning distraction as I reached for the payphone. Sorry, sir, I called over my shoulder. Didn't catch that. I'm dialing the police. One of the thugs, wiry and smirking, barked a laugh. Ha! Good luck! I grimaced as the line buzzed, a busy signal. Of course. Gotham's finest were always elsewhere when they were needed. "Gimme your wallet," the first thug snarled, brandishing a gun held sideways like a cheap gangster cliché. I tensed, expecting Bruce to hesitate, to back away. Instead, his eyes sharpened, a flash of red-hot fury igniting in them. It happened so fast I barely followed. Bruce moved like a shadow, swift and precise. The gun flew into the air as Bruce struck, a single fluid punch, followed by a throw that sent the thug crashing into a wall with a sickening thud. I hung up the useless phone with a heavy sigh. "Must you antagonize psychopaths, sir?" The remaining thugs froze, stunned. Bruce reached up calmly and plucked the falling gun out of the air, inspecting it with mild disdain. "A Glock 26, he muttered, crouching beside the groaning thug. "This the best you could steal?" "It works good," the man wheezed. Bruce sneered. "Short grip. No oil. Barrel's leaded. You don't even know how to clean it." The thug lunged weakly for the gun, but Bruce let the disassembled parts fall piece by piece, a pitiful pile at the thug's feet. The remaining two men rushed Bruce, chains and knives in hand. He met them like a storm, his training evident in every calculated strike. I leaned back against the car, exasperated. "Master Bruce," I called out dryly, "need I remind you that brawling with thugs is no substitute for professional therapy?" Bruce glanced over his shoulder, his breath steady. "Therapy takes years." "And instead," I sighed, "you spent 12 years studying martial arts. Very practical." Bruce straightened, brushing dust from his coat as the last thug crumpled to the ground. "I like fighting. I'm good at it. You always told me to find myself. Maybe this is it." I raised an eyebrow. "Well done, sir. You've beaten them unconscious. Now what?" Bruce paused, thoughtful, before his lips curved into a grin that unsettled me more than anything else that night. The city streets outside the Rolls-Royce seemed darker now, sliding past us in blurred streaks of graffiti, neon, and shadow. I gripped the steering wheel, my eyes flicking up to the rearview mirror every so often. There they were, 3 thugs sprawled in unconscious heaps across the pristine leather seats, groaning softly in their stupor. One of them let out a particularly graceless snore. I frowned and raised the partition between the front and rear compartments with a quiet hum of protest. Bruce noticed, of course. He leaned back against the passenger seat, grinning as though he'd just won a prize. "You don't have to scrub the leather upholstery," I said pointedly, allowing the words to hang heavy with disapproval. "A small price to pay for the safety of our streets," Bruce replied breezily, as though his midnight escapade had solved Gotham's crime problem in one fell swoop. I sighed, a deep, weary sound that came from years of experience with his particular brand of stubbornness. "You've changed nothing, sir," I said, my tone sharp. "Gotham City is still overrun with criminals, and your parents are still dead." The grin slid from Bruce's face. I hated saying it that bluntly, but sometimes Master Bruce needed the truth delivered without the cushioning. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. "We're lucky you weren't hurt," I added, softening slightly. "Lucky?" he shot back, incredulous. "Taking those punks?" "The element of surprise was in your favor," I interrupted before he could finish. "If word gets out that Bruce Wayne is a master of martial arts, next time they'll attack in greater numbers. Or shoot first." Bruce didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the dark streets outside, stubborn and skeptical, as always. The boy had a head harder than reinforced steel, and all the arguing in the world rarely seemed to dent it. I pressed on. "And consider this, liability," I said with emphasis, hoping reason might achieve what scolding never could. "These thugs can easily sue you for crippling them and win millions. After all, you're a trained fighter, and you're rich. They'll get your money, and I'll have to go to work for them." The corner of his mouth twitched at that, though whether from amusement or defiance I couldn't tell. "But maybe they'd listen to you," he quipped. "Sir," I said firmly, "you are not a normal teenager. Quit acting like one. You carry the enormous burdens of celebrity and great wealth, and you must learn to deal with it." I turned to look at him briefly, making sure he was listening. "Master Bruce, it is time to grow up." For a long moment, Bruce said nothing. Then his face hardened. His eyes, those dark, brooding eyes that seemed far older than his years, flashed with a spark of anger. "You know," he muttered, voice low, "other butlers all say, 'Yes, sir,' 'No, sir.'" I couldn't help myself. The corner of my mouth twitched into a smile of its own. Other butlers' employers don't enjoy brawling with street criminals. Everybody needs a hobby, he said, leaning back into the seat with a cavalier air that didn't fool me for a second. Sir, I said dryly, have you considered collecting stamps, coins, butterflies? He didn't respond, though I caught the flicker of a smirk before he turned back to the window. The rolls pulled to a stop in front of the Gotham City main police station. If the rest of Gotham had been a mess, this place was its beating, festering heart. Even here, in front of what should have been a beacon of law and order, crime operated without pretense. Streetwalkers in fishnets and heels leaned against lampposts, drug dealers exchanged wadded cash and small plastic bags, and thieves moved with brazen carelessness, their eyes scanning for easy marks. Bruce climbed out of the car, dragging the groggy thugs, now bound with their own belts, out of the back seat like sacks of potatoes. He glanced back at me, the faintest trace of irony in his voice as he asked, "Think the car's safe here? You know, in front of the police station?" I shrugged noncommittally, though I couldn't quite keep the unease from my expression. "Safe enough," I muttered, though it felt more like a prayer than an answer. He didn't wait for more. The doors of the station loomed ahead, and Bruce, dragging his unwilling passengers behind him, headed straight for them. I followed at a respectable distance, though I couldn't stop my mind from racing. There he was, 17 years old, barely a man, yet carrying the weight of Gotham on his narrow shoulders as if it were his birthright. And maybe, in some ways, it was. But even so, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I could keep him from breaking under it. The Gotham City police station was not at all what one might expect. On television, such places were depicted as bustling centers of action and authority, alive with the urgent buzz of ringing phones and tense conversations. Reality, as it turned out, was far less glamorous. The station was dead silent. We stepped inside, Master Bruce with his usual confident stride and I a half-step behind, casting a wary eye over the room. The air stank faintly of stale coffee, cheap aftershave, and neglect. A desk sergeant sat slouched at his post, utterly engrossed in the crumpled pages of a magazine that boldly proclaimed "Jugs" across its cover. Around him, a few officers idly filled in crossword puzzles, their heads bent low with the sort of single-minded focus usually reserved for actual work. Bruce cleared his throat loudly. "Hello?" he said, his voice firm but polite. "Excuse me. These thugs here tried to rob us, at gunpoint." For emphasis, he gestured behind us, where the groggy, bruised criminals we had dragged from Crime Alley sat slumped in a heap. They looked every bit as miserable as they should. The sergeant finally looked up, his eyes bleary with disinterest. "Yeah?" he drawled. "So where's the gun?" I stepped forward without ceremony, holding up the sack I had carried in from the car. With a deliberate flourish, I upended it over the sergeant's desk. A cascade of gun springs, pins, and assorted pieces clattered noisily against the scratched wood. The sergeant stared at the pile, as though I had just spilled a bag of confetti at his birthday party. He prodded the disassembled remains of the weapon with one finger. "That's it?" In response, I retrieved another sack from under my arm and emptied it as well. Chains, knives, and a collection of rusty pipes clattered down in a tangled heap. The sergeant blinked slowly. "Yeah. Okay," he muttered, rubbing a hand across his face. "You want to file charges, you got to talk to the detectives." "Fine," Bruce said, his tone clipped. "Where do we go?" The sergeant shrugged as though he were answering a question about the weather. "They went home at 4:30. They'll be back in the morning around 9. Bruce stared at him, stunned. "There's no detectives working now?" he asked incredulously. "What do I do with these crooks? Take them home with me?" The sergeant shrugged again, utterly unbothered. "Not my problem." "Well, that's reassuring," I muttered under my breath, before I could suggest that we simply leave the degenerates tied up outside the station like forgotten luggage. A young voice piped up behind us. "My dad's still working." Bruce and I turned to find a girl standing there, small but impossibly self-assured, grinning up at us. She couldn't have been more than 13, with fiery red hair cropped short, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and a skateboard poking out the top. The desk sergeant frowned at her. "Beat it, Barbara." She ignored him entirely, looking straight at Bruce. "My dad's a detective," she said, matter-of-factly. "The best cop in Gotham City, the papers say so." Then, with the conviction of a prophet, he's going to be commissioner someday. The room erupted in scornful laughter from the surrounding officers, but Barbara wasn't swayed. She turned back to Bruce, and her jaw dropped. "You're Bruce Wayne," she squeaked, the words tumbling out in awe. "I see your pictures all the time in Teen People and Tiger Beat. I saved the articles if you want to see 'em." She blinked up at him, suddenly batting her eyelashes in what she must have imagined was a captivating manner. The desk sergeant's expression twisted into something resembling panic as he straightened in his chair. "Bruce Wayne?" he repeated. "You're Bruce Wayne? Wayne Corp, Bruce Wayne?" "Sorry," he added hurriedly, sitting up straighter as if his slouching had somehow offended Gotham's wealthiest heir. "Didn't recognize you, Mr. Wayne." The room came alive then, cops leaping into action as they swarmed to take custody of the thugs, suddenly far more attentive to the notion of law and order. The sergeant grabbed for his phone, dialing with newfound urgency. "Mr. Wayne, I'm calling Lieutenant Flass," he said quickly. "He'll come in and take your statement, personally." Bruce shook his head, unimpressed. "Forget it," he said, turning toward the stairs. "I'm going upstairs to talk to Barbara's dad." Barbara's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "All right," she beamed, practically bouncing on her heels. "I'll go guard the rolls, sir," I said, brushing past the sergeant and casting a disdainful sniff at the entire affair. The man glared at me as though I'd somehow insulted his very existence. I allowed myself a small smirk as I exited. As I stepped outside, I heard Barbara's enthusiastic chatter carrying up the staircase. "My mom died last year. Cancer, the big C. If I don't bring Dad dinner, he won't eat. Men, wow, Bruce Wayne, this is so cool!" I could only imagine what kind of trouble the boy was walking into now. Back at the desk, the sergeant hunched over his phone, muttering low into the receiver. "Sir, Bruce Wayne. He's here. Upstairs. Talking to you-know-who." The voice on the other end crackled angrily, the harsh buzz making the sergeant wince. His face darkened as he listened, the colour draining from his cheeks. I paused just outside the door, catching that final sour look on his face. Whatever they were afraid of up there, I couldn't help but think that they should be. The detective squad room was as bleak as the rest of Gotham, a room filled with outdated desks, dim light, and the stale smell of too many long nights. Dust and neglect clung to the corners. Most of the desks sat empty, abandoned by their occupants hours ago. Only one man remained, hunched over his desk, the clatter of an ancient typewriter echoing like a lonely drumbeat. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, tired-looking, with sleeves rolled up to the elbow. Papers and evidence files spilled across the surface of his desk, a chaotic testament to his work ethic. And yet, despite the late hour, he hammered away at the keys with the slow determination of someone unbothered by time. Barbara Gordon, impossible to ignore as ever, rushed ahead of us, her voice cutting through the stillness. "Hey, Dad! Look who's here!" The man at the desk, Sergeant James Gordon, as the nameplate indicated, held up a finger, silently asking for patience as he continued to type. Bruce froze beside me, staring, his brow furrowed with recognition. I watched as the scene unfolded across his face, an old memory clawing its way to the surface. I saw it too, the quick flash of his parents' murder, though I had never been there myself. I knew the story well enough. The chaos, the blood, young Bruce crying as the police swarmed the scene, indifferent, even callous. Except one man. A rookie cop who had knelt down, whispered quiet words of comfort, and let the boy bury his face in his shoulder. A man whose name tag had read J.W. Gordon. Gordon finished typing, stood up and extended his hand, a large calloused hand, toward Bruce. "Jim Gordon," he said, his voice steady, though something about Bruce's presence gave it a slight edge. Bruce took the hand, his movements slow, deliberate. "Bruce Wayne." For a moment their eyes locked, and a shadow of recognition passed across Gordon's face. He hesitated, clearing his throat, and muttered, Just a minute." He turned quickly toward the blackboard behind his desk, pulling down a map with a faintly guilty motion. But I had seen it, so had Bruce. Lines and arrows crisscrossed the board, leading to one central name, Wayne Corp. Bruce's face hardened, his mind clearly churning with questions he wasn't yet ready to ask. "Sensitive information," Gordon said stiffly, his back still to us. "An ongoing investigation." Bruce's silence stretched into something heavy before Gordon turned back, hands stuffed in his pockets. What can I do for you, Mr. Wayne? Bruce didn't hesitate. You were there, he said quietly, when my parents were murdered. Gordon's shoulders slumped ever so slightly, though his voice remained steady. Yes, he said, I was. So, Bruce pressed, his tone sharp with the weight of years unspoken, who killed them? The thin file lay open on Gordon's desk, its pages sparse and pitiful, empty, really, the Wayne murder file. I watched Bruce as he turned the pages, his expression growing darker with each useless line. No suspects, no leads. Words that told him nothing. The crime scene photos were grim, images I suspected he had no desire to revisit, and he finally slammed the file shut with a force that rattled the desk. Not much there, Gordon said softly, as if apologizing for something far beyond his control. I'm sorry. Bruce nodded faintly, though the tension in his posture never eased. Gordon tried to shift the conversation, his fingers returning to his battered typewriter. These 3 robbers, he said, without looking up. You willing to testify at their trials? I'm leaving Gotham tomorrow, Bruce said, his voice clipped. After some family business, can we keep my name out of this? So the papers don't get a hold of it. I've got to think about my reputation, liability, all that. Gordon didn't argue. Yeah, no problem, he said casually. They'll just plead out to a couple months anyway, and be right back on the streets. The ease with which he said it made my stomach turn. Gotham justice, if one could call it that, hadn't improved much. Family business, Gordon added offhanded. Wayne Corp, right? Bruce hesitated before nodding. Neither man blinked. It felt like a silent game of chess, 2 players holding their ground, trying to read the other. Big outfit, Gordon said, his voice deceptively mild. You get involved much with the day-to-day stuff? No, Bruce said shortly. Trustees run everything, until I turn 18, in 3 days. And then, Gordon pressed, his tone casual enough to make it sound like small talk. You run Wayne Corp? Bruce didn't flinch. Tomorrow I'm signing papers to let the trustees keep running things. I don't want anything to do with Gotham City. He nudged the closed murder file pointedly. History, he said, the word heavy and bitter. You know. Gordon nodded slowly, as though he understood all too well. Yeah, Gotham's always been a tough town, but it's gotten worse. Lots worse. Bruce looked at him, searching. Why don't you get the hell out? Gordon's eyes flicked toward Barbara, who lingered nearby, obliviously fiddling with her skateboard. When he looked back at Bruce, the answer was there, unspoken. Beats me, he said, shrugging faintly. 8 years to go for a pension, I guess. Somebody's got to stick it out. Try to turn things around. Bruce's expression shifted ever so slightly. He nodded once, as if the words had touched something deep within him. He stood, holding out his hand. Good meeting you, he said softly. Again. Gordon shook the offered hand, his grip firm. Same here. Barbara beamed at Bruce, entirely unaffected by the solemn exchange between the 2 men. Bye, Bruce, she chirped. Come by for dinner sometime. I'm a great cook, right, Dad? Gordon hesitated for just a moment before forcing a smile and muttering, right. Bruce's smile was faint as he turned to leave. Bruce, Gordon called after him suddenly. Bruce paused, glancing back. Who you meeting with at Wayne Corp tomorrow? Gordon asked, his tone oddly neutral. Charles Palantine? Bruce's brow furrowed slightly, but he nodded. Yeah. Take care, Gordon said, his voice heavy with something that didn't quite sound like casual advice. Bruce nodded again and left the squad room without another word. I watched Gordon as he sat back down at his desk, his face drawn and shadowed under the dim lights. Something had passed between the 2 of them, something I couldn't quite place. And as I caught up with Master Bruce outside the station, I wondered if that parting question, who you meeting with tomorrow, had been more of a warning than a curiosity. Chapter 3, Toxic Secrets. The Wayne Corp Tower dominated Gotham's skyline like a testament to ambition and wealth. Its sleek glass facade shimmered in the sunlight, projecting an aura of control and power. Beneath its shadow, workers bustled with practiced efficiency, their faces set in the rigid determination of corporate life. I followed Master Bruce through the imposing glass doors, where a wave of cool, artificial air greeted us. I stayed a half-step behind, observing him closely as he re-entered the world his father had built, a world that had since morphed into an intricate maze of corporate machinations. Charles Walker Palantine III received us in his stunning penthouse office, a space radiating extravagance. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a commanding view of Gotham, as if Palantine had claimed dominion over the city by merely sitting above it. The room itself was designed to awe. The imposing mahogany desk, curated artwork meant to exude refinement, and, most tellingly, the thick contract placed conspicuously on the desk in front of Bruce. "Bruce, welcome!" Palantine greeted, his posture crisp and his smile polished to perfection. "My, you've grown." Bruce extended a polite hand, his tone measured. "Mr. Palantine." "Please, call me Charles," Palantine insisted smoothly. "Have a seat." Bruce settled into a leather chair opposite the desk, his eyes scanning the room with calculated calm. I stood near the door, hands clasped behind my back, silent but attentive. "Congratulations on graduating," Palantine said warmly. "At long last, the board and I, as your guardians, were starting to worry. At the rate you were cycling through prep schools, we thought we might run out." Bruce gave a thin smile, a look I knew well. It wasn't one of amusement, but one that silently dared the speaker to drop their pretense. "Have you been enjoying your time back?" Palantine continued, attempting small talk. "Seen any sights?" Bruce leaned back, his tone casual. "The Gotham City police station." His eyes locked onto Palantine. "Why are the cops investigating Wayne Corp?" For a fraction of a second, Palantine's polished facade cracked. He recovered quickly, laughing lightly. "Investigating Wayne Corp? Nonsense," he declared, his smile confident. "We have an excellent relationship with the police. The Commissioner and I are on very good terms. Who told you that? I'll look into it." Bruce didn't respond, instead gesturing to the thick stack of papers on the desk. "These are the documents you want me to sign? The ones that hand control of Wayne Corp over to you?" Palantine's expression shifted into something almost paternal. "Bruce," he began gently, "your father was an extraordinary man, devoted to his patients and to improving Gotham. But he had little interest in the daily operations of Wayne Corp. That's why he entrusted the board and me to manage it." Bruce's face remained impassive, though the mention of his father caused a flicker of emotion. "Don't I technically own Wayne Corp?" he asked. Palantine chuckled, his tone patronizing. "You hold a majority interest, not direct control. The board makes decisions collectively, requiring a 2/3 majority. It's all quite routine." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a warm, conspiratorial tone. "You're young, Bruce. Go to college. Enjoy life. There's no rush for you to get involved in the nitty-gritty of corporate affairs." Bruce's fingers idly flipped through the contract, the sheer volume of legal jargon clearly intended to overwhelm. Palantine smiled indulgently. "Bruce, your father and I were close friends. I only want what's best for you. This contract simply continues the arrangements he put in place. It allows us to protect your interests, as he would have wanted." Bruce's hand hovered over the pen as Palantine slid it toward him, a sleek, expensive instrument that gleamed in the sunlight. And then I coughed. It was a quiet, deliberate sound, but it was enough. Bruce's hand froze. Palantine's gaze darted to me, his composure slipping for the briefest moment. "Apologies," I said mildly, dabbing at my mouth with a handkerchief. "The air quality in Gotham is dreadful." Bruce stood abruptly, scooping up the contract and tucking it under his arm. "I'll review these tonight," he announced. "Let's go, Alfred." Palantine's polished veneer cracked as he hurried after us. "Bruce, wait! Is something wrong? Would you like one of our lawyers to walk you through it?" Bruce shook his head. "No, thank you." As we reached the elevator, Palantine's tone grew more urgent. "Bruce, I'll need those signed by morning. You turn 18 in 2 days. Time is of the essence." Bruce didn't respond, but before the doors could close, a voice called out, "Bruce?" A young man stood frozen in surprise. I recognized him immediately, Lucius Fox. So did Bruce. "Lucius?" Bruce said, his expression softening. "Lucius Fox! It's been years!" The two exchanged a brief embrace, though Lucius's discomfort under Palantine's watchful gaze was palpable. "Lucius and I used to play together," Bruce explained. "His father worked at Wayne Manor. How's he doing?" Lucius's face fell. "He passed away." Palantine interjected smoothly. "A tragic accident at Wayne Chemical. Lucius has been doing well, though, an intern here at Wayne Corp. Bright future ahead, isn't that right, Lucius?" "Yes, sir," Lucius murmured, avoiding Bruce's eyes. "Good to see you, Mr. Wayne." As Lucius disappeared down the hall, Bruce's troubled gaze lingered. "Tomorrow morning, Bruce," Palantine called after us as the elevator doors slid shut. Inside, Bruce's expression darkened. "You're worried about what will happen if I sign those papers." I met his gaze steadily. "And I'm worried about what will happen if you don't. Sir, have you considered what would happen if you were incapacitated before your birthday? The board would inherit everything. Palantine would win." Bruce blinked, startled. "You're serious?" "Deadly so," I replied grimly. Bruce's jaw tightened. "I need to figure out what this contract says, and fast." "We'll need a lawyer," I said reluctantly. "A trustworthy one, if such a thing exists." Bruce smirked faintly. "Good thing Harvey Dent just finished his first year of law school." I stared at him, aghast. "Harvey Dent? Sir, you must be joking." The hallway outside Harvey Dent's luxury apartment vibrated with the muffled thump of bass-heavy music, loud, unruly, and entirely unsuitable for the civilized. Master Bruce knocked sharply on the door, his knuckles rapping with a precision that matched his expression. I stood behind him, hands clasped, my posture straight and formal, already bracing for whatever chaos awaited us beyond. The door swung open, and chaos delivered. A towering man filled the doorway, decked out in a clown costume of questionable craftsmanship. His green wig was slightly askew, his makeup garish, and his grin far too wide to be natural. "Is Harvey here?" Bruce asked, his tone flat, but his shoulders tensed in anticipation. The clown flung the door open wider, gesturing with exuberant flair. "Come on in, bro." The moment we stepped inside, it was clear the apartment had descended into a carnival of decadence. Lavish, oversized furniture clashed with the barely controlled anarchy of the party. Costumed guests packed the space, spilling drinks, laughing and dancing in a cacophony of noise and flashing lights. Music blasted from every corner, making normal conversation an impossible dream. "Bruce!" A booming voice cut through the din. Harvey Dent appeared, his face lit up with a triumphant grin. He wore silk pajamas, an obvious nod to Hugh Hefner, and carried himself with the reckless confidence of a man immune to consequence. "You came!" Harvey exclaimed, wrapping Bruce in an exaggerated embrace. "Harvey," Bruce muttered, already exasperated, "you didn't say it was a costume party." Harvey's grin widened. "If I'd told you, you wouldn't have shown up. You hate fun." He turned toward the throng, throwing his arms wide. "Everyone, this is Bruce Wayne, my partner in crime from the prep school days." A raucous cheer followed, leaving Bruce visibly uncomfortable. Once the commotion settled, Bruce leaned closer to Harvey. "I need you to look at some papers." "Now?" Harvey interrupted, incredulous. "Are you insane? I've got 2 soup bottles in the hot tub right now." His gaze darted around the room. "Oh, wait, Susan's here." Bruce groaned softly, the sound of a man resigned to the inevitability of Dent's antics. "Harvey," he began again, lifting the folder of papers. "This is... later." Harvey dismissed him with a wave, already turning toward the crowd. "Don't move. I'll be back." Bruce sighed, the frustration evident on his face. "We're the only ones not in costume." I straightened my chauffeur's cap with deliberate precision. "Speak for yourself, sir," I replied dryly before making my way toward the bar. A strong drink felt necessary if I was to endure this spectacle. Bruce took to wandering, his discomfort obvious as he weaved through the costumed revellers. He sidestepped a cowboy, ducked under a pirate's swinging hat, and finally found himself backed against a closed door. The door creaked open before he could step away, and slender, clawed fingers slipped out, catching the light just enough to gleam menacingly. "Coming through," a voice purred. "Watch the claws." The woman who emerged moved with a feline grace. Her tiger costume clung to her figure, her olive skin catching the dim glow of the apartment's scattered lights. Dark, slanted eyes sparkled with amusement, framed by a smile both sharp and alluring. Bruce blinked, startled. "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you." The woman smirked. "Clearly, good thing I can see perfectly in the dark." She wiggled her clawed fingers for emphasis. "I'm Selina Kyle, and you're Bruce Wayne." Even from across the room, I could tell Bruce was caught off guard. Selina Kyle had that effect. "How do you know Harvey?" he asked, masking his unease behind casual politeness. "I don't," she replied easily. "I live next door." "Oh," Bruce said, fumbling slightly. "Rich parents, or a great job?" Selina's smile deepened. "Consultant. I consult. I'm very good at it." Before Bruce could respond, Harvey reappeared, bellowing from across the room. "Bruce, Kitchen, now, Bruce groaned, muttering under his breath. He's been trying to set me up with his sister for years, calls her a good person with a great personality. Selina raised an eyebrow. Makes her own clothes, loved by all the other girls? Exactly, Bruce replied. Harvey stormed over, exuding his usual over-the-top energy. Susan's waiting, let's go! Bruce hesitated. Harvey, what does Susan look like? Harvey's grin widened. Bruce, looks aren't everything. You should know that by now. He turned briefly to Selina. Hi, Selina. Bye, Selina. As Harvey pulled Bruce toward the kitchen, Selina leaned closer, her voice low and teasing. If you get cornered, I'll come rescue you. Bruce barely had time to respond before Harvey's sister came into view. Susan. She wasn't just attractive, she was stunning, her angelic costume perfectly accentuating her ethereal beauty. From up here, Susan said softly as she joined Bruce on the balcony later, Gotham almost looks peaceful. Bruce nodded, the tension of the evening fading slightly. Almost. But peace, in Gotham, never lasts. Selina reappeared, her presence sharp and deliberate as she draped an arm around Bruce. Bruce, she purred, I missed you. Susan's expression cooled instantly, her warmth evaporating. Ah, the millionaire playboy! Bruce spun toward her, flustered. No, wait! But Susan was already gone, leaving Bruce to glare at Selina. What the hell are you doing? He demanded. Selina smirked. Saving you. Realization dawned too late. By the time Bruce turned back, Susan had disappeared into the crowd. Harvey returned moments later, oblivious as ever. Bruce, you just pissed off the two prettiest women here. Impressive. Bruce groaned, his frustration mounting, until I appeared at the balcony door. Master Bruce, I said firmly, we need to leave. Now. Bruce's focus sharpened instantly. Gotham cooled, and the party was over. The gates of Wayne Chemical loomed ahead, jagged silhouettes against the murky night sky. The Rolls-Royce purred quietly as we pulled up to the front guard shack, the car's polished elegance in sharp contrast to the decaying industrial sprawl that stretched out beyond. Pipes hissed, steam curled like ghostly fingers into the air, and thick columns of smoke bellowed from towering stacks that clawed at the heavens. Even from here, I could smell the acrid tang of chemicals in the air. A guard emerged from the shack, flashlight in hand, and pointed Bruce toward the factory's interior. I shifted uneasily in my seat, my eyes tracing the skeletal outline of the plant. It was the sort of place no one visited willingly. We drove through the gate and followed the winding access road toward the riverfront. There, parked behind a battered Gotham City police car, we came to a stop. Bruce was already unbuckling his seatbelt, his hand reaching for the door. Master Bruce, I said sharply, surely we're not about to wander off into the darkness unaccompanied? He turned to me, his face set with that infuriating determination I had come to know too well. Stay with the car, Alfred. I must insist. But it was too late. Bruce swung the door open and disappeared into the shadows before I could stop him. I threw the car into park and climbed out after him, my voice carrying over the low hum of machinery. Alone? But, sir, I insist. He didn't look back. He was already striding into the blackened maze of pipes and concrete, his silhouette vanishing into the gloom. I stood there for a moment, my heart sinking into my shoes as the dark factory seemed to close in around him. Bloody fool, I muttered under my breath, though the anger was all for show. Truthfully, it was worry that twisted in my chest like a vice. Bruce hurried through the labyrinthine grounds, his footsteps muffled by the grime-covered earth beneath him. He moved toward the sound of faint voices and followed the path to a large open hatch, an access point, sunken into the ground, its heavy cover propped wide like the gaping mouth of some mechanical beast. From below came the dim glow of a flashlight and the echo of footsteps against metal. Shat Gordon? Bruce called down, his voice reverberating into the depths. Yeah! Down here! Gordon's voice floated up, curt but recognizable. Bruce glanced over his shoulder, checking perhaps to see if I had followed, and then turned back to the hatch. He descended quickly, his boots hitting the rungs of a rusted ladder. Thunk! 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 The air inside the tunnel was heavy, almost suffocating. A low hum vibrated through the walls, the sound of machinery far off but alive. Bruce hit the ground and turned to see Sergeant James Gordon standing nearby, flashlight in hand. The older man's face was tense, his free hand resting near the holster on his belt. Careful, Gordon warned, his light sweeping across the tunnel floor. Bruce stepped forward and froze. There, just ahead, a pool of liquid shimmered with an unnatural glow. The flashlight's beam caught the surface, turning it an eerie green, iridescent, almost beautiful, if you ignored the faint chemical stench that curled through the air. "What is it?" Bruce asked, his voice low. "Chemicals," Gordon replied, the beam of his flashlight bouncing off the dark walls. "Hazardous waste. These tunnels used to dump all kinds of stuff into the river, but that was outlawed years ago." Bruce frowned, staring at the glowing pool. "Wayne Corp still dumping it?" "Maybe," Gordon said grimly. "We've pulled some bodies out of the river lately, radioactive, full of poisons and chemicals. Even..." He hesitated, as though the words themselves were difficult to believe. "Some weird biological stuff." Bruce turned to Gordon sharply. "This is why you called me down here, to see this?" Gordon froze. For a moment his expression shifted, confusion, then suspicion. He raised the flashlight higher, his gaze fixing on Bruce. "I didn't call you," he said slowly. The words hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Bruce's brows knit together, his mind clearly working to piece together the sudden wrongness of the situation. "You didn't?" Clunk! The sound of the hatch slamming shut overhead rang out like a gunshot, followed by the unmistakable click of a lock turning. Both men whipped their heads upward, staring into the black void that now cut them off from the world above. A silence followed. It was the kind of silence that pulls you to the edge of panic, the stillness heavy with expectation. And then, somewhere deeper in the tunnel, a low groaning sound echoed through the pipes. Creak! The noise vibrated through the metal walls, accompanied by the unmistakable hiss of something massive shifting into place. Gordon turned sharply, his flashlight swinging toward the sound. What the hell was that? Before Bruce could answer, the groaning turned to a deafening roar. The rush of water. Valves had opened. Somewhere in the bowels of this facility, great unseen gates had been breached, and the tunnels around them came alive with the terrible, rushing sound of liquid surging through pipes. "Run!" Gordon shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the growing thunder. Bruce's eyes widened as the realization hit them both at the same time. They were trapped. Trapped underground, in a tunnel that was quickly becoming a death trap. Above, the sound of water grew louder still, reverberating off the walls and growing nearer by the second. Somewhere far behind, the Rolls sat parked in the darkness, and I remained alone, unaware of the horror unfolding below. And Bruce Wayne, my young charge, was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 4: Rising Tides. The factory's roar grew louder, the sound of rushing water echoing violently through the narrow tunnel. For a moment, it seemed as if the very walls trembled with the force of what approached. "Run!" Gordon bellowed, his voice nearly drowned out by the din. Bruce didn't hesitate. He pivoted and sprinted into the darkness, Gordon's flashlight beam wobbling behind him as their hurried footsteps clanged against the metal floor. I could almost feel the terror gripping them, a claustrophobic trap tightening with every step. The tunnel stretched on, a corroded artery of rust and grime leading deeper into the forgotten factory. Pipes hung from the ceiling like mechanical veins, leaking in spots, their ominous gurgles swallowed by the deafening roar of the oncoming water. Suddenly, Bruce skidded to a halt. The tunnel ended. Oof! I could imagine the hollow thud as Bruce collided with the unyielding metal wall. Gordon's flashlight flickered erratically, sweeping over the dead end. There was no exit, no door, no salvation, only a small opening high above, 20 feet out of reach. "Climb on my shoulders," Gordon barked, urgency sharpening his voice. Bruce shook his head. "It's too high." He glanced at the side wall, his mind racing. Without warning, he moved. Charging at the curved wall of the tunnel, his steps were swift and deliberate. He vaulted upward, pushing off the metal like an acrobat, flipping through the air with astonishing grace. His hands found the small pipes along the ceiling, gripping them as if gravity were merely an inconvenience. I could almost hear Gordon's startled gasp as Bruce swung himself, hand over hand, toward the opening. "I can't do that!" Gordon shouted, disbelief cracking his voice. Bruce pulled himself into the narrow tunnel above and dropped to his stomach, reaching down toward Gordon. "Run at the wall. Jump for my hand." Gordon didn't argue. Backing up, he took a breath and charged, boots striking the wall as he leapt, fingers outstretched just shy of Bruce's grasp. The roar behind them grew deafening. "Hurry!" Bruce urged, his voice edged with urgency. Gordon tried again, teeth gritted, and this time Bruce stretched further, their hands clasping. Bruce hauled him upward, arm muscles taut with strain as Gordon dangled, dead weight. The flashlight caught what was approaching, a wave of toxic, glowing green sludge surging down the tunnel. It smashed into the far wall below with a force that rattled the ground. With a groan of effort, Bruce heaved Gordon into the narrow passage. They collapsed, gasping for breath, but there was no time to rest. The tunnel where they had stood moments before had transformed into a rushing river of iridescent sludge, rising fast. "Go! Go!" Gordon barked. On hands and knees they scrambled through the waist-high tunnel, the toxic sludge creeping closer. Gordon glanced back and cursed. The ooze had begun seeping into their passage, its vile shimmer just below their hands. "It's coming! Don't touch it!" "I see lights!" Bruce called, his voice strained but resolute. Ahead, a faint glow beckoned like a lifeline. Bruce pushed forward, leading them toward it, his movements frantic yet calculated. Almost there. But the tunnel ended abruptly, blocked by a heavy metal grate. Bruce slammed into it, his fingers clawing at the rusted bars. Beyond, city lights glittered faintly across the river. "Damn! It's locked!" Bruce hissed. The padlock was thick, corroded, and bolted from the outside. Gordon yanked his pistol from its holster. "Move! Wait! Don't! Damn!" The gun's crack echoed in the confined space, sparks flying as the bullets struck the lock. Bruce flinched, ducking instinctively. "Careful!" he snapped. Blam! Blam! More shots rang out, and at last the lock shattered. Bruce rammed his shoulder into the grate until it burst open, sending him tumbling into the open air. Gordon froze. For a heart-stopping moment there was no sound. Then, "Over here!" Gordon turned. Bruce dangled from the swinging grate, feet kicking slightly as he clung to its edge. Behind Gordon, the sludge roared closer. A glowing wall of toxic green surged toward him. "Jump!" Bruce shouted. Gordon didn't hesitate. He leapt for the opening, arms outstretched. Bruce caught him just as the torrent exploded from the tunnel, cascading into the night in a waterfall of poison. "You okay?" Gordon asked shakily. Bruce gritted his teeth. "How long do you think this thing can hold?" As if in answer, the hinges groaned ominously. "Not long," Gordon muttered. Bruce's eyes darted to a nearby concrete ledge. "I'll swing you over there." "On 3! 1, 2, 3!" With a surge of strength, Bruce swung Gordon toward the ledge. Gordon's hands gripped the concrete just as the grate's hinges snapped. Bruce launched himself after Gordon, catching his waist mid-fall. Together they scrambled onto solid ground. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They lay there gasping, while the toxic sludge raged below like a furious tide. Back at the car, flashing lights painted the scene. Gotham's police and Wayne Corp security milled about, shouting orders. I stood by the rolls, caught between relief and frustration. Bruce emerged, his usual calm betrayed by faint traces of adrenaline. "Sir," I said sharply, "how could you, displaying acrobatics to Gordon?" Bruce smirked faintly. "Shouldn't you be saying, 'I'm glad you're alive'?" "No one must know what you can do." "No one," I hissed. Bruce shrugged. "It's Gordon. I trust him." "He's a policeman," I retorted, "bound by law. If he suspects, he'll have no choice but to act. Do you want to be his prime suspect every time Gotham sees a masked vigilante?" Bruce's defiance flickered, but understanding dawned in his eyes. "How spectacular was I?" he asked lightly. I sighed. "Moderately." Gordon approached, grim. "No workers tonight. Vandals broke in, released the sludge. Just a coincidence we were down there when the hatch locked behind us." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm so relieved. For a moment, I thought someone wanted you dead." Gordon frowned. "An anonymous tip led me there, tonight." "Someone's targeting you both," I muttered. Bruce's gaze shifted, his tone low. "Palantir." As if summoned, a sleek car pulled up. Out stepped a sharply dressed man, his polished smile cold and calculating. Bruce's expression hardened. "Let's go." Mrs. Fox's kitchen radiated warmth and comfort, the kind of space where the air smelled perpetually of home-cooked meals and happy memories. I sat at a small, well-worn table, staring down at a plate piled high with gravy-drenched pork chops, creamy mashed potatoes, and greens so tender they practically melted on my tongue. Across the room, Mrs. Fox stood beaming. clearly pleased to see me savouring her handiwork. "It's good, Alfred?" she asked, her grin as wide as Gotham Harbour. "Not that fancy French stuff you whip up." I dabbed at my mouth with a napkin, momentarily at a loss for words. "This gravy is miraculous," I managed finally, the reverence in my tone unmistakable. She laughed, a deep, hearty sound that carried the confidence of someone who already knew the answer. In the adjacent dining room, Bruce, Sergeant Gordon and Lucius Fox sat around the table, their plates half empty, the conversation considerably less warm. "Dumping hazardous waste?" Lucius asked, his fork hovering in mid-air. "Let's say they get caught. Worst-case scenario, it's a fine or some bad PR. That's not worth murder." Bruce and Gordon exchanged a look, but Lucius shook his head, clearly unconvinced. "No, the math doesn't add up," he said, his frustration evident. "Wayne Corp pays millions, to properly dispose of chemical waste, acids, biohazards, you name it. I've signed off on the invoices myself. Why spend that kind of money only to risk everything by dumping illegally?" "Could be a money laundering operation," Bruce suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Lucius snorted. "Wayne Corp owns banks, Bruce. They don't need to cut corners like this. If people are willing to kill, there's something much bigger at play here." The weight of his words hung heavy over the table. Finally, Gordon broke the tension with a sheepish grin. Past the pork chops?" Back in the kitchen, I was fighting a battle of my own against the pork chop in front of me. It was devastatingly delicious, each bite pulling me further into culinary bliss. By the time I scraped the last drop of gravy off the plate, I felt almost ashamed of my surrender. "Madam," I began solemnly, setting my fork down with a dramatic flourish, "every bite has such full, rich flavour. I must beg you, as one chef to another, what is your secret?" Mrs. Fox's eyes sparkled with mischief. Without a word, she reached over and thumped a heavy container onto the counter. I stared at it. "Lard," she said proudly. The world seemed to shift slightly beneath my feet. I looked down at my empty plate, torn between horror and temptation. Surely, I thought, consuming an entire meal cooked in pure lard was not a feat the human body could endure unscathed. And yet, I reached for a second helping. Some truths, it seemed, were better left unexamined. When it was time to leave, the mood at the door was lighter, though the shadows of our earlier conversation lingered. Bruce hugged Mrs. Fox warmly. "Don't be a stranger, Bruce," she said, her tone affectionate. Then she turned to Gordon. "You too, Sergeant?" "Yes, ma'am," Gordon replied, managing a small smile. Lucius escorted us out, his expression pensive. "I'll start digging through the Wayne chemical files," he said. "Maybe something there will shed some light on this." Bruce nodded. "Let me know if you find anything." As I waddled toward the door, still stuffed from dinner, I caught Bruce giving me a pointed look that said, "Let's go." Our next stop was Harvey Dent's apartment, which, as anticipated, was a spectacle of chaos. Empty champagne bottles and half-eaten hors d'oeuvres cluttered every surface, with the occasional misplaced garment draped over furniture. At one point, a yawning supermodel wandered by, disappearing into another room without so much as a glance in our direction. Harvey was sprawled across the couch in a silk robe, looking equal parts glamorous and dishevelled. In his hand, he waved a stack of Wayne Corp documents like they were a nuisance rather than important legal paperwork. "Don't you dare sign this," he croaked, his voice rough from a night of indulgence. Bruce and I took a seat opposite him, taking in the scene with varying degrees of exasperation. "They get everything," Harvey continued, gesturing dramatically with the papers. "You get a pittance, no rights, no protections, completely at their mercy. Don't do it." Before Bruce could respond, a phone rang. Harvey grabbed it, his tone instantly transforming into sugary sweetness. "Mother, no, he hasn't called. What's he done now? Oh, he's impossible, isn't he?" A second phone rang. Without skipping a beat, Harvey picked it up, switching seamlessly to an entirely different voice. "Father, yes, she's on the other line. She's insufferable. Let me handle her." With both phones held to his ears, Harvey paused to shoot Bruce an apologetic shrug. "Your parents still not speaking?" Bruce asked. "Nope," Harvey replied, sighing dramatically. "They live in separate wings of the house and only communicate through me." Then, back into the phones. "Mother, don't hold back. Father, what did she do now?" Bruce pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly nearing his limit. "Harvey," he interrupted, his tone firm, I think my guardians, the board, are trying to kill me. That got Harvey's attention. He lowered both phones, his brow furrowing. Well, that stinks, he said before quickly returning to his calls. Harvey, Bruce pressed, if I sign this contract or die today, they get everything. What happens if I live until tomorrow? Harvey hung up the phones, his focus narrowing. If you live until tomorrow, they can't touch you. The second you turn 18, your estate is locked up tight. If you die after that, everything goes to probate. They get nothing, so yeah, stay alive until tomorrow. Sound advice, I muttered dryly. Bruce smirked faintly, but remained thoughtful. As we left, Bruce paused at the door, his tone deliberately casual. By the way, how's Susan? Harvey grinned knowingly. Made an impression, huh? Bruce blushed faintly. Where does she work? 4th and Main, downtown, Harvey replied with a sly smile. Bruce nodded, muttering a quick thanks before stepping out. Trailing behind, I noted his determined expression. But deep down, I couldn't shake the thought. If all we have to do is survive until tomorrow, why does it feel like the longest day of our lives is just beginning? The quiet hum of the Rolls-Royce filled the cabin as I navigated Gotham's midday traffic, the world outside a blur of motion and grey. In the back seat, Master Bruce sat hunched over the mountain of papers he had insisted on bringing along. His eyes scanned the dense legal text, his lips pressed into a thin line of frustration. I could see it building, the familiar storm of irritation he tried so valiantly to keep in check. Then, with a sharp exhale, he tossed the papers aside, the pages scattering across the seat like fallen leaves. It's useless, he muttered, leaning back and pinching the bridge of his nose. I allowed a brief glance at him through the rearview mirror, though my attention quickly returned to the road. There was an uneasiness creeping over me, a subtle prickling at the back of my neck that I had learned never to ignore. My eyes flicked back to the mirror, this time focusing on the cars behind us. 2 dark sedans, identical, predatory. Their movements were too deliberate, too synchronized, and far too close. Not to alarm you, sir, I said evenly, though my tone carried a weight I knew he would recognize. But it appears we're being followed. Bruce sat up immediately, his attention snapping to the rear window. He turned in his seat, his sharp gaze narrowing as he studied the approaching vehicles. The tension in the car thickened as the sedans closed the distance between us. Their polished black frames loomed larger in the rearview mirror, their engines growling as they pulled alongside us. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, and I pressed my foot down slightly on the accelerator. Bruce's voice cut through the rising unease. "They're going to shoot!" I spared him a glance in the mirror, my tone as dry as the desert. "This is a Rolls-Royce, sir. They wouldn't dare." No sooner had the words left my mouth than BAM! The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the air, and one of the side windows exploded in a spray of glass. Shards rained down onto the leather upholstery like lethal confetti, and I flinched despite myself. "Is nothing sacred?" I roared, half in disbelief, half in fury. The Rolls sprang to life as I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, the engine roaring with a fury that belied its elegant exterior. We shot forward like a bullet from a gun, weaving sharply through traffic as the sedans gave chase. "Hold on, sir," I barked, my focus locked on the chaos ahead. The sedans weren't letting up. They surged after us, their tires screeching as they maneuvered with terrifying precision. Another burst of gunfire erupted, the sound deafening. I swerved hard, narrowly avoiding another volley of bullets that ricocheted off the road just behind us. "Any chance you're reconsidering bulletproof glass for the next car, Alfred?" Bruce asked dryly, though I could hear the tension laced beneath his tone. "I'll add it to the list," I muttered, yanking the wheel hard to the right as we narrowly avoided clipping a delivery truck. The Rolls-Royce, bless its craftsmanship, handled the sharp turns with surprising agility, though I could feel the weight of our pursuers pressing closer. I darted through an intersection just as the light turned red, horns blaring angrily around us. "Sir," I began, my voice calm but firm, "I strongly suggest coming up with a plan." Bruce, ever calm under pressure, leaned forward, scanning the cars flanking us. "Keep us moving," he said, his voice steady. "As if I had other intentions," I muttered under my breath. Another barrage of bullets shattered the air, and this time I felt the unmistakable lurch of a tire beginning to give way. The Rolls stuttered slightly, a groan of protest rising from its undercarriage. Bruce sat back, his jaw set, his eyes burning with something I'd come to recognize as determination, and, worryingly, recklessness. My stomach churned. Whatever was coming next, I had the sinking feeling it would be far from ideal. Chapter 5. The Only Way Forward. The chase through Gotham's streets had turned into a trial of skill, endurance, and horsepower. Behind the wheel of the Rolls-Royce, I manoeuvred through the chaos with practiced precision, dodging traffic as horns screamed and tires skidded. The dark sedan stayed close behind, their engines roaring, relentless in their pursuit. In all my years of service, both in Her Majesty's military and as butler to the Wayne family, I had faced more than my share of perilous situations. This one, however, tested the limits of both my patience and the Rolls. "Hold tight, sir," I said calmly, though the bedlam outside might have suggested otherwise. The sedans bore down on us as I wrenched the wheel, taking a sharp turn that sent the tires howling. We shot into a narrow alley, the Rolls threading through the tight space with the elegance of a needle pulling thread. The sedans barreled in after us, their larger frames scraping against dumpsters and brick walls as sparks flew and metal groaned. "Not bad," I muttered, catching a glimpse of the chaos in the rearview mirror. But they didn't falter. The sedans pressed on, persistent. Ahead I spotted a precariously stacked pile of 55-gallon drums, rusted and teetering near the edge of the alley. A faint smile touched my lips as I clipped the stack with the Rolls' rear bumper. The drums tumbled down with a thunderous crash, spilling their contents across the path of the pursuers. Behind us, tires screeched, metal crunched, and something splattered audibly. One sedan spun out briefly, but they both pressed on. Tenacious fellows. "They're still with us," Bruce observed from the back seat, his voice calm but edged with tension. "They are a rather obstinate lot," I replied, accelerating as we tore out of the alley. We turned onto a narrow street, but dread settled in as I saw what lay ahead, a barricade. Beyond it, tall brush obscured whatever was hidden behind. "Alfred," Bruce said sharply, his voice rising, "you're going through that barricade." A quick glance in the mirror showed his determination. My own voice, however, remained unflappable. "It would appear so, sir." The sedan surged closer, aiming to box us in. I pushed the accelerator further, the Rolls growling in defiance. "Brace yourself," I muttered, my hands steady on the wheel. As the barricade loomed, I acted. My foot slammed the emergency brake as I spun the wheel sharply to the left. The Rolls performed a flawless bootleg turn, its front tires locking while the rear end swung around in a graceful arc. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the world pivoting around us. When the tires bit back into the road, we were facing the opposite direction. The barricade loomed now behind us, just as the sedans thundered forward. Unable to react in time, they smashed through the wooden barricade, disappearing into the brush with the groan of splintering wood and crunching metal. We came to a screeching halt, the Rolls whispering into stillness as I cut the engine. Bruce and I stepped out into the aftermath, the air heavy with the smell of burning rubber. A moment later the sound reached us, a crash, then another, followed by the faint tinkle of shattered glass far below. Bruce stood staring, stunned. I calmly took out my handkerchief and began polishing the hood ornament. "Rolls-Royce," I said with measured pride. "Accept no substitutes." Bruce shook his head, his expression torn between disbelief and amusement. "We should invest in bulletproof glass." I raised an eyebrow, tucking the handkerchief away. "Sometimes, sir, you truly frighten me." Later, the Rolls pulled up in front of a modest yet tired-looking building bearing a hand-painted sign, Gotham City Youth Shelter. Bruce stepped out, studying the colourful murals that tried their best to brighten the weathered exterior. "This is where Susan works?" he asked, more to himself than anyone else. I watched as he straightened his coat and walked inside. The shelter's outdoor play area buzzed with the sounds of children's chatter and laughter, though their demeanour carried a toughness born of hardship. Bruce hesitated, scanning the space until his gaze landed on Susan. She was seated on a bench, speaking gently to a teenager who looked on the verge of tears. Bruce hesitated, unsure how to approach. Before he could decide, a boy stepped forward, his small frame carrying the swagger of someone twice his size. "What's your deal?" he asked, sharp eyes appraising Bruce. Bruce blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me? Runaway? Orphan? Cop trouble?" added an older boy, his tone skeptical. "Orphan," Bruce replied cautiously. The older boy glanced at the rolls. "That your fancy car?" "I'm here to see Susan," Bruce said, keeping his tone even. "I'm a friend of hers." The boy turned and hollered, "Hey, Susan, this guy a friend of yours?" Susan glanced up, her eyes meeting Bruce's. After a brief pause, she shook her head ever so slightly. The kids turned back to Bruce, suspicion written all over their faces. Bruce sighed audibly. Just then, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "What's up?" Bruce's head snapped toward it. "Barbara." Barbara Gordon rolled up on a skateboard, dismounting with effortless grace. She flashed Bruce a meaningful look that said, "Play along." "Name's Barb," she said loudly, crossing her arms. "I don't know you. Got it?" Bruce caught on quickly, nodding. "Got it." Susan approached now, her expression betraying mild amusement. Bruce looked at the group of kids, his tone softening. "I just want to talk to Susan," he said. "That okay with you?" A little girl stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Why?" "Well," Bruce began after a pause, "I want to apologize." That got their attention. "For what?" the older boy demanded. As the kids closed in, Bruce glanced at Susan, who raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying the scene. Minutes later, Bruce was seated on the ground, surrounded by kids hanging on his every word as he concluded his story. "And that," Bruce finished, "is why I had to apologize to Susan." A little girl raised her hand. "Do you like her a lot? Like a whole bunch?" Bruce fidgeted under their scrutiny. "A bunch." The kids erupted in delighted "Oosh" and "Ahs." As the group scattered, Bruce found himself alone with Susan. She studied him with a softened expression. "Great kids," Bruce said quietly. "There but for the Wayne millions," Susan replied wistfully. Bruce nodded. "I think about that every day." For the first time, Susan seemed to truly see him, a flicker of understanding passing over her face. "Well," she said, "thanks for the apology." She turned to leave, but Bruce called out, "Susan, would you want to go out sometime?" She stopped, surprised. "I thought you were leaving town." "I thought so too," Bruce admitted, "but things keep pulling me back." Susan smiled faintly. "Sure." Bruce smiled in return, and they walked away in opposite directions, leaving unspoken possibilities hanging in the air. Barbara Gordon leaned against the corner of the youth shelter building, her skateboard tucked under one arm, her eyes following Bruce Wayne as he strode away. There was a wistful sigh in her breath, the kind reserved for unattainable dreams. "Barb," came a voice beside her. She turned to see one of the shelter girls, arms crossed and head tilted in exasperation. "He's way too old. Like, way old." Barbara's lips curled into a small, dreamy smile. "In 10 years, he'll be 28 and I'll be 23. The girl shrugged, clearly unimpressed, and skipped off toward the others. Barbara sighed again, this time with the full weight of a love-struck teenager, her gaze still fixed on the spot where Bruce had disappeared. The halls of Wayne Manor were silent, heavy with the sort of stillness that came when shadows stretched long across its vast, empty rooms. I approached Master Bruce where he stood in the heart of Thomas Wayne's study, staring up at the large family portrait that dominated the far wall. His parents smiled down from the frame, frozen in time, their faces warm yet haunting. He stood motionless, shoulders rigid, his jaw set as though locked in battle with an invisible opponent. Whatever turmoil churned in his mind, it wasn't easing. The shrill ring of the telephone pierced the stillness. Its sound echoed faintly from another room, breaking the spell. My footsteps, measured and deliberate, carried me into the study. "It's Charles Palantine," I said, folding my hands behind my back. "He's left numerous messages already, and now he insists." Master Bruce didn't turn. His gaze flicked to the blinking light on the phone, a small beacon of impatience glowing insistently. He crossed the room slowly, his movements deliberate, though I could tell he was devising something. When he reached the phone, he hesitated for a brief moment before veering toward the stereo instead. Without a word, he pressed a button, and the room erupted with deafening rock music. He grabbed the receiver, raising it to his mouth. "Hello, Charles!" he shouted into the phone, his voice deliberately over the top. "Guess what? I met these two girls yesterday. Supermodels. What? Can't hear you. Oh, right. The paperwork. He paused dramatically, his tone growing more careless. I thought I sent it to you. I signed it. It's got to be here somewhere. We'll look for it, right, girls? He slammed the phone down and shut off the music in one graceful motion, the silence returning as quickly as the noise had come. I couldn't help but grin. Master Bruce, that was a fine performance. You might consider cultivating that image of an idiot millionaire playboy. It's an enormous asset, keeping your opponents underestimating your true abilities. Bruce turned to me, an eyebrow raised, a sly smile playing on his lips. Like you, Alfred? He asked innocently. Like that gold medal for fencing you hide deep in your bureau? It looked sort of Olympic, as I recall. I raised my chin slightly, though the corners of my mouth twitched. You were always a nosy child, sir. And then there are those rumours, Bruce continued, leaning back against the desk now, his eyes glittering with amusement. In all the stories you tell about your youth, you never once mention the British Secret Service. I cleared my throat, keeping my expression neutral. Sir, you should know better than to listen to idle gossip. I am merely the Wayne family butler, as my father was before me, and his father before him. Bruce smirked, but let the subject drop. His gaze drifted back to the portrait of his parents, his features softening as he leaned back against the desk. I remember when your father died, he said quietly. I was, 5? The next day you arrived unannounced to take his place. I'm glad you did. For once, words failed me. I stood there, my throat tightening as the memories swirled unbidden. I felt my eyes sting and quickly cleared my throat again, regaining composure. As am I, sir, I managed. The telephone rang again, breaking the moment. I stepped forward, lifting the receiver to my ear. Wayne Residence, I said crisply. There was a pause, then a familiar voice. Yes, sir, I replied, holding the receiver out to Bruce. St. Gordon. Bruce took the phone, his expression shifting into focus. Hello? From across the city, I imagined St. Gordon's voice carrying the weight of both concern and urgency. Bruce, you okay? I've got reports of 2 cars shooting at a Rolls-Royce. Master Bruce's eyes flicked toward me as a grin spread across his face. I'm fine, he said casually. Any news? Your friend Lucius called, Gordon replied. The weekly shipment of hazardous waste goes out tonight. I'm taking a few cops I trust to check it out. Bruce's voice didn't waver. I'll meet you there. No, Gordon cut in firmly. This is dangerous. You'd only get in the way. Don't forget, there's a price on your head until tomorrow. Stay put, I'll call you. There was a sharp click as Gordon hung up. Bruce lowered the phone slowly, a wicked grin spreading across his face, the sort of grin that could only mean trouble. Master Bruce, I began, my voice carefully measured, though alarm was already building in my chest. He didn't respond. Surely you're not thinking. He strode toward the door, his movements purposeful, his grin unrelenting. Master Bruce! But he was already gone. Chapter 6, A Life Alone. The night was thick with tension, the kind that clung to your skin like the soot-laden air of Gotham itself. At Wayne Chemical's front gate, a line of hulking tanker trucks hissed and growled as they rolled inside one after another. Their metallic frames gleamed under the dim light of nearby street lamps, each adorned with ominous warnings. Biohazard, toxic waste, radioactive, poison. They looked like beasts in a caravan, ominous and unnatural, and their entry was accompanied by the hiss of air brakes that seemed to echo far longer than they should have. Further down the street, in the shadows of a narrow alley, Sander Jim Gordon crouched behind an abandoned dumpster, his sharp eyes following the tankers as they disappeared through the gates. 2 officers were with him. Rupert Montoya, a hardened man of 40, all sharp angles and sharper instincts, and Harvey Bullock, a younger officer with a softer, rounder frame who seemed far more preoccupied with the contents of a box of doughnuts. That's 6 trucks so far, Montoya muttered, his voice low and sceptical. It doesn't make sense, Gordon said, more to himself than anyone else. Fox says Wayne Chemical generates only a few thousand gallons of waste a week. Those are 4,000-gallon tankers, 6 of them. Bullock, meanwhile, peered into the donut box, unconcerned with anything resembling toxic waste. There's 4 donuts left. You guys want any? Gordon shot him a look, half exasperation, half disbelief. Bullock, you're going to get fat." "Nah," Bullock said through a mouthful of pastry. "I got one of those high metabolisms. Never put on weight." Gordon sighed, straightening up. "Let's go." From the shadows just beyond the alley, I watched with rising concern as Master Bruce dropped silently to the ground, landing in his black attire like a phantom. He grinned to himself. The boy loves this far too much, I thought, ready to follow Gordon and the others. I had predicted as much. Before he could take a step, I extended my umbrella handle, looping it around his arm with a practiced flick. "Master Bruce," I said firmly, stepping out of the darkness, "you were planning to join Sergeant Gordon and the others, weren't you?" Bruce turned, his face falling into that stubborn mask I'd seen countless times since his youth. "I told you to stay by the car, Alfred." "And you told me nothing about running headfirst into danger," I countered, holding my ground. "You cannot seriously intend to involve yourself in this." "Gordon needs my help," Bruce replied, his voice steady, his determination maddeningly unshakable. "Once you reveal yourself, sir, you can never take it back." I argued, my voice rising just slightly. Bruce set his jaw. "I can trust Gordon." "You can trust no one," I said, the words sharper now, edged with something I hadn't intended to show. "That is your lot in life, Master Bruce." His brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" He hesitated, his voice quieter now. "Are you saying someone my father trusted, someone at Wayne Corp, killed him?" The question hung in the air, and I saw the weight of it land on him like an anvil. I had gone too far. "Why not?" I said, my voice trembling just slightly. "They're trying to kill you." I saw it then, the dizzy, shaken look in his eyes as his mind tried to reconcile it all. Wayne Corp, the very empire his father had built, now a shadowy web of betrayal and greed. "I cannot," I began, my voice softening. "I will not let them kill you as they killed him. I will not let that happen." He stared at me, realization dawning, his voice low and searching. "Do you blame yourself?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to remain composed. The memories of Thomas Wayne, his kindness, his vision, his quiet strength, lingered like ghosts. I could not bear to fail his son. "My issues are not important here," I said, regaining my steel. "Sir, you are the newly crowned king, surrounded by a court full of intrigue and murder. You must be smarter than they are. Never let them know what you're thinking or doing. Never let them suspect what you are capable of." I paused, my throat tight, the words heavy. "You can trust no one. No one." I met his gaze, and for a moment the mask fell away from him. I saw not the defiant young man he so often pretended to be, but the boy I had raised, the boy who had looked to me in his darkest hour and found a steady hand. "And while it breaks my heart, sir," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper, "you are destined to face your life alone." There was a beat of silence, the weight of it pressing down on both of us. Bruce stared at me, his expression stunned, as if the foundation of his world had shifted just enough to leave him unsteady. And then, after what felt like a lifetime, he nodded, his shoulders squaring as a new resolve set in. "You're right, Alfred," he said quietly. "I see that now." I exhaled softly, relief mingling with sadness. But then Bruce tilted his head ever so slightly, and the faintest of smiles played across his lips. "But there's one thing you overlooked," he added. I raised an eyebrow, wary of his tone. "Sir?" "I'm not completely alone," he said, his gaze meeting mine with an intensity that took me by surprise. "There's one person I can trust." He stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "Thank you, Alfred." The words landed with unexpected force, and I felt my throat tighten once again. I cleared it awkwardly, retrieving my handkerchief to dab at my suddenly misty eyes. "Thank you, sir," I said, my voice rougher than I'd intended. I tucked the handkerchief away and straightened my posture, adding with hope, "So we can go home now?" Bruce's grin was answer enough. "No," he said simply. "Sir." "Gordon still needs my help," he explained, already turning toward the shadows again. "I just won't let him see me." "Master Bruce," I called after him, knowing full well it was pointless. He sprinted toward a nearby parked car, his movements fluid and athletic. With practiced ease, he ran up the hood, leapt onto the roof, and sprang toward the towering security fence. He caught a rain gutter, swung upward, and disappeared over the top of the fence with an infuriatingly confident backflip. I groaned aloud, shaking my head as I muttered, "It's a miracle I still have a full head of hair." Minutes later, I arrived at the front gate of Wayne Chemical, where Gordon and his men were already causing their own brand of chaos. Officer Bullock, evidently frustrated with protocol, delivered a punch to the guard that sent the poor man sprawling unconscious to the ground. Bullock stormed inside as Gordon and Montoya exchanged resigned shrugs and followed. I approached the inert guard, frowning down at him with disapproval. "Well," I muttered, straightening my coat, "now that is subtle." With a sigh, I followed after them, resigned once more to the chaos that followed Master Bruce like a shadow. The warehouse at Wayne Chemical was a maze of shadows and industrial menace. Conveyors clattered, pipes hissed, and catwalks crisscrossed overhead like the web of a malevolent spider. A night crew, cloaked in white protective suits, moved with mechanical precision as they loaded tanker trucks. Massive 55-gallon drums, their exteriors bearing ominous warnings, were lowered into the tankers, followed by streams of green sludge poured over the rows of crammed barrels. From my vantage point in the shadows, I could see Sergeant Gordon and his small team watching intently from the edge of the warehouse floor. Officer Montoya, ever sharp-eyed, muttered something to Gordon. "That's 6 trucks so far," I heard her say. "Doesn't add up," Gordon replied, his voice taut with suspicion. "Lucius said Wayne Chemical only produces a few thousand gallons of waste a week. Those tankers hold 4,000 gallons each. 6 trucks. Officer Bullock, predictably uninterested in the logistics of hazardous waste, had his attention fixed on a box of donuts tucked under his arm. "You guys want any?" he asked cheerfully, oblivious to the tension. Gordon gave him a sidelong look. "Bullock, if you keep eating like that—" "Nah," Bullock interrupted, grinning. "I got a high metabolism, never gain weight." I would have rolled my eyes if the situation weren't so dire. Gordon gestured toward a figure on the loading platform, clipboard in hand. "There," he said, "that's the head guy. We'll need him to finger the higher-ups. Let's move." The 3 officers slipped off into the shadows, but I had no time to observe them further. My attention was drawn upward, to a figure perched silently on a ladder, his dark attire blending seamlessly with the gloom. Master Bruce, of course. I followed his movements carefully, keeping to the shadows myself. Bruce peered down at the man with the clipboard, his sharp eyes tracking every detail. "Guy with the clipboard," I heard him mutter under his breath. "Got him." He climbed swiftly, his movements quiet and deliberate, but before I could call out to him or stop him, Gordon's shout rang through the warehouse. "Police! You're all under arrest!" The room erupted into chaos. Workers in white protective suits scattered like ants, scrambling across the platforms and catwalks. The cops gave chase, Bullock and Montoya handcuffing suspects as they went. Bullock, ever heavy-handed, knocked one worker unconscious with a punch and let out a triumphant chuckle as Montoya rolled her eyes beside him. On one of the catwalks above, I caught sight of a guard with a rifle moving to intercept Gordon. But before the man could aim, a hand reached up from below, grabbing his foot. The guard hit the metal grating of the catwalk with a thud, his weapon clattering from his hands as he went still. Bruce flipped gracefully onto the catwalk, landing silently. He glanced toward the headman, now dashing into an elevator that began rising toward the roof. Bruce's expression tightened as he realized the doors were closing too quickly for Gordon to catch up. "Darn it," Bruce hissed, his voice barely audible. "He's getting away." His eyes darted around, taking in the fast-moving conveyor chain overhead. A moment later, he leapt and grabbed onto the chain, which carried him upward at breakneck speed. I kept my focus on Bruce, but movement in the corner of my eye pulled my attention away. A guard, positioned high above, was leveling a sniper rifle at him. I acted on instinct. My umbrella, finely tuned and versatile tool, swung up with perfect precision. The hooked end caught the barrel of the rifle, jerking it aside just as the guard fired. The bullet ricocheted harmlessly off a support beam. I stepped out of the shadows, still gripping the umbrella, and used it like a cricket bat to strike the guard squarely across the chest. He stumbled backward, flailing as he crashed to the floor below. "Sir," I muttered under my breath, glancing back up at Bruce as he disappeared onto the upper catwalk. "You must learn to watch your surroundings. Now what are you doing?" At the elevator platform, Bruce climbed off the chain, his eyes flicking to the rising elevator floor indicator. His impatience was palpable. "Gordon, you'll never catch him," he muttered, looking down at the sergeant far below. "Do I have to do everything around here?" As the elevator crept higher, Bruce's foot bumped into something, a small stool with a lunchbox balanced precariously on top. He picked up the box, opened it, and examined the contents. A sandwich, an apple, and a banana. "Well, Alfred," he said aloud, grinning, "you've thought of everything." To my astonishment, he sat on the stool, peeling the banana with a calmness that bordered on absurdity. "All this crime-fighting sure works up an appetite," he mused. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the head man burst out, ready to run. He didn't get far. Bruce stood, banana still in hand, and swung the stool with precise force. It connected with the man's midsection, sending him sprawling to the ground, unconscious. Bruce stared down at the man, still munching on the banana. "Uh-oh," he muttered, glancing around. "This looks weird." From my vantage point, I saw everything. "Master Bruce," I said aloud, though I knew he couldn't hear me. "What in the world?" Then the realization struck me. Whimsical, perhaps even silly, but good show, sir. Good show. I allowed myself a smile, one of pride that I couldn't quite suppress. Gordon reached the platform moments later, his breath coming in short gasps. He froze when he saw the head man lying unconscious, his eyes narrowing in confusion. He nudged the man's foot with his own, and something fell loose. A banana peel. "Slipped on a banana peel," Gordon muttered incredulously, his tone half disbelief, half bewilderment. He looked around suspiciously as though searching for answers that the scene refused to give him. With a shake of his head, he hauled the unconscious man toward the elevator. Later, as I waited by the rolls, trimming my nails to pass the time, I saw Bruce approach, his grin wide and self-satisfied. "It went great," he said cheerfully. "And you were worried." "Indeed, sir," I replied with mock gravity, opening the car door for him. "I don't mean to be a worrywart." Bruce chuckled as he slid into the seat. "It's okay, Alfred. You just need to learn I can take care of myself." I sighed as I climbed into the driver's seat. "I will strive to remember that in the future, sir." As I started the engine, Bruce added, almost bouncing in his seat, "You know what? I think I've found something I'm really good at." The words struck me like a punch to the gut. "Just shoot me now," I muttered under my breath, steering us into the Gotham night. Lieutenant Flass stood as Gordon and his team entered his office, his sharp uniform pressed to perfection. Handsome and athletic, he had the demeanor of a man used to being in control, or at least projecting the image of it. His features carried an easy confidence, though there was something practiced in his smile, something too deliberate in the way he leaned slightly forward, as if to welcome them. "Gordon," he said, his tone professional but clipped. "I'm going to have to cut your prisoners loose." A chill settled over the room. Gordon didn't flinch, though I could see his jaw tighten as he squared his shoulders. "What?" Flass pressed on, his voice calm but unyielding. "You know why. Illegal search and seizure. You should have gone through proper channels, gotten a warrant." Gordon's voice cut through the air, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "Every time I go through channels, the bad guys disappear before we get there." Flass tilted his head, his expression shifting ever so slightly, his polished exterior showing the faintest hint of a crack. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there's leaks," Gordon replied, his words deliberate, heavy with meaning. The room fell silent for a moment. Flass leaned back slightly, as if weighing his next words carefully. Then he shook his head. "You can't search without a warrant, Gordon. You know that." Gordon reached into his bag and slammed a stack of papers onto Flass's pristine desk. "Wayne Chemicals EPA permits," he said, his tone sharp. "The EPA can inspect any time, at their discretion." Flass frowned, glancing at the paperwork with disinterest. "You're not the EPA," he said dismissively, "and I know all the local EPA boys. This won't hold." Gordon pulled out another piece of paper, his movements slow and deliberate, like a chess player making a decisive move. "This," he said, holding the document just long enough for Flass to register its significance, "is from a friend of mine at the EPA in Washington. Since the Gotham City EPA office is rife with corruption, his words, not mine, this authorizes me to inspect Wayne Chemical as an EPA representative." The certainty in Gordon's voice left no room for argument. "The arrests will hold up," he said firmly. For a moment, Flass's polished exterior faltered. His face darkened as his eyes flicked to the papers in front of him. There was a beat of silence, the tension thick enough to cut. Then, in a sudden shift, Flass's expression softened. He leaned back in his chair, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're right," he said smoothly, his voice carrying an edge of forced geniality. "Good job." Later, in the interrogation room at the police station, Gordon entered with Bullock and Montoya, all three of them laughing. The sound echoed briefly, a rare moment of triumph. But their laughter died the instant they saw the cell. The bad guy was hanging from the bars, his legs dangling at eye level. The scene was stark, brutal. The broken door of the interrogation room hung ajar, the metal warped as though it had been forced open. A desk sergeant stood nearby, his expression indifferent, as if this sort of thing happened every day. "He hung himself," the sergeant said flatly. "We broke down the door, tried to get to him, but it was too late." He shrugged, a gesture so casual it was almost insulting, and walked off without another word. Bullock and Montoya stood frozen, their faces pale, the gravity of the moment settling over them like a fog. Gordon's face hardened as he stared at the lifeless body, his fist clenching at his side. Then, without warning, he slammed it into the wall, the sharp thud of the impact echoing through the room. Back at Wayne Manor, the evening had dragged on into a tense silence. I opened the heavy front door, watching as Master Bruce stormed up the front steps, his frustration evident in every hurried step. "I can't believe you," he snapped, brushing past me as he entered the darkened foyer. "Getting us lost like that! We must have gone in circles for an hour!" I trailed behind him, carefully closing the door as it gave a low, creaking groan. "What time is it, Alfred?" Bruce asked, his tone still sharp. I glanced at my watch, noting the hour. Then, unable to resist, I allowed myself the faintest of smiles. For all his frustrations, Master Bruce was still alive, and tonight that was more than enough for me. The house was dark when Master Bruce and I stepped into the entryway of Wayne Manor. The silence was profound, the kind that settles into a place long accustomed to emptiness. Bruce stopped abruptly in the dark, his instincts sharp and alert. Then came a sound, a faint scuffling. Bruce stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he froze in place, and just as quickly, the lights blazed to life. "Surprise!" The word erupted from every corner of the room. Bruce gasped, stepping back slightly as his eyes took in the scene before him. The cavernous entryway, so often still and hollow, now overflowed with life. Harvey Dent stood front and centre, arms spread wide like a ringleader. Beside him his sister Susan smiled warmly. Selina Kyle leaned casually against the banister, her eyes gleaming with amusement. Lucius Fox and his mother Billy stood nearby, joined by Jim Gordon and Barbara, who waved enthusiastically at Bruce. Officers Bullock and Montoya lingered near the edges, their awkwardness oddly reassuring. "It's midnight!" Harvey declared triumphantly. "You're 18 and you're alive! Happy birthday!" Cheers broke out, and in an instant Bruce was surrounded. Hearty slaps on the back, warm handshakes and joyful hugs came from all directions. I stayed near the door, a small smile tugging at my lips as I watched. Susan hugged him gently, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. They exchanged a soft smile, no words needed. Barbara Gordon bounded over next, her grin practically lighting up the room. "Bruce, happy birthday!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him with unrestrained enthusiasm, making Jim Gordon shift uncomfortably. "She insisted on coming," Gordon muttered to Bruce with a wry shake of his head. Bruce smiled faintly, but cut straight to the matter. "How'd everything turn out?" he asked in a low voice. "That guy, did he name anyone big at Wayne Corp?" Gordon's face darkened, his answer short and grim. "No, we got nothing." Bruce's smile faded. "Nothing? You're alive," Gordon said softly. "That's something." Sensing the mood shift, Harvey stepped in. "Hey, everybody," he called, drawing the room's attention as he held up a stack of familiar papers. "The Wayne Corp contract." "Bruce owns Wayne Corp now," Harvey announced with a theatrical flourish. "We don't need these anymore." With that, he lit the papers and tossed them into the roaring fire. The crowd cheered as the flames consumed the documents, curling them into ash. Then the doorbell rang. I moved instinctively to answer it, pulling the heavy front door open to reveal Charles Palantine. The hum of celebration behind me fell into an uneasy hush as he stepped into the doorway. Immaculately dressed, His polished smile was betrayed by a tension in his eyes. "Bruce," Palantine said smoothly, his voice carrying an air of feigned cordiality. "I called earlier, but no one answered." His gaze shifted to the fireplace, where the last remnants of the contract smouldered. "Ah," he murmured, his tone loaded with unspoken meaning. "I see." All eyes turned to Bruce, who stood his ground, his expression unreadable. Palantine stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have bad news, Bruce," he began, solemn yet calculated. "It seems some unpleasant things were happening at Wayne Chemical. Illegal things. If I'd known sooner, I could have handled it quietly. But now, Wayne Corp will take a beating in the press and the stock will nosedive. You and I have lost a great deal of money tonight." Bruce nodded, his tone neutral but firm. "I'm sorry to hear that, Charles." Palantine studied him, his smile tightening. "Well, what's done is done," he said, producing a small, wrapped package. "I brought you a gift." He handed the box to Bruce, who unwrapped it slowly as the room watched in tense silence. A gasp escaped Barbara, and she took a step back as if bracing for something terrible. Bruce paused before revealing the gift, a textbook titled Business for Beginners. Palantine's smile widened, though it lacked warmth. "I hope you'll let me guide you, Bruce," he said. "You've got a lot to learn. Let me help." Bruce met his gaze unreadable for a long moment before nodding thoughtfully. "Thank you, Charles." Palantine departed, his polished shoes echoing faintly against the stone floors. The room exhaled collectively, the tension lingering. Harvey broke the silence with his usual gusto. "Speech!" he cried, grinning. "Speech!" The others joined the chant, and Bruce, caught between amusement and resignation, raised his hands. "All right," he said. "I've got a lot to learn, it's true, and I don't know if I can make a difference in Gotham City." The room quieted, his words hanging in the air. "But," he added with a faint, mischievous grin, "I'm willing to stick around and try. Who knows? Anything could happen." Laughter rippled through the group. "One thing's certain," he continued, his tone lightening. "Whatever happens, it won't be dull." Cheers erupted again, and I stepped forward with a small camera in hand. "All right, everyone. Gather round," I called. "This is a moment worth remembering." There were grumbles and laughs, Harvey pulling Bullock into place, Barbara bouncing on her toes to be seen, and Selina rolling her eyes beside Bruce. But soon they were all together, a motley collection of friends, allies, and the promise of what lay ahead. As the camera flashed, freezing the moment, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the years to come. Years later, I stood in the shadowed cavern beneath Wayne Manor, the photograph trembling slightly in my hands. The faces in the picture, once unfamiliar, now meant everything. "And so," I whispered, placing the photo beside a tattered copy of Business for Beginners in the first display case, "it began." I stepped back, my eyes drifting across the long row of empty cases yet to be filled, the boxes still sealed, the stories untold. "So much more to catalogue," I murmured to the silence. "So much more to tell. Years of struggle, deaths, loves, loss, heartbreak, victories, madness, redemption." My gaze turned to the darkness ahead, where a familiar silhouette stood waiting. Black as night, its edges faintly illuminated, the mask. I approached slowly, staring up into its empty eyes. "To explain why a man," I said, my voice catching, "this man saw no other recourse, no other way forward, but to put on a mask." The cavern seemed to breathe around me as I turned and began the long ascent up the stone staircase. My footsteps echoed, carrying the weight of the years, and behind me the silhouette of the bat waited, timeless and eternal.